Welcome to yet another live stream. In this one, we are going to talk about error handling. And mostly we are going to be looking into some common things, common patterns, common anti-patterns, and some of the common mistakes, which is most important, that I'm seeing being done in code bases when it comes to error handling. So we are going to look into different approaches, different ways of doing it, and what are the important aspects when it comes to error handling to take in consideration, so that we do a good job. Essentially, that's what we are going to be focusing on in this stream. As always, for the people inside the call, you can always ask a question. For those on YouTube that are following, you can also ask questions in the chat. So hopefully everything's okay. If there is anybody in YouTube, it would be nice if I can get a confirmation if everything is working fine, the sound is there, and so on and so forth. And without much further ado, we are gonna get started right away. So here I have done a little preparation. So let's take a look what we have. So we have an interface that supposedly is going to load some, it's gonna load user details. It takes user ID, it replies user response, which is a serializable class. But that's not very important for now, so I'm gonna collapse it. And we have domain type, which is gonna be user that we map our response to. And here is where we are going to focus most of our work. Basically, it could be a use case, could be a repository. I'm not gonna get into discussion what has to be this one. It's gonna be a topic for a different stream where we are gonna talk more about architecture. But let's assume that there is a class that uses that API that we have created, and it's gonna be making some calls to load the user, then map to domain and deliver the results towards instances that are up. In this case, we have also a view model, which is part of our presentation or UI layer. And the idea is that as we know, for good practices, when we have, let's say, happy path, we load the user response, we map it to our domain type, and then we deliver it to our UI, towards our UI. The same has to happen with errors. But oftentimes we see that not being done or not being done properly. So let's take a look at what are some of the usual mistakes that we are making and how we can get over them. Sounds good? So typically, if we are thinking about errors, first and foremost thing that we have to take a look into is talk with our teammates, with the business, to understand how granular we want to be in the errors. Let's say we have different ways to fail, different errors could happen. Do we want to inform the user as precisely as possible, or is it okay if you just say, hey, an error happened, deal with it? So in case, like, once we understand how granular we want to be, then we can approach just about anything. So let's assume here we want to load the user. So typically what we are gonna do, we are gonna say user is going to be our API, load user for that user ID, to user, which is this extension function that I've created for convenience. And then basically we can return this user. So far, so good. However, the problem is that this call is prone to errors because we are making a network call. It can fail for different reasons. Now, if we decide, again, depending on what we want to, how granular we want to be with the errors, we can introduce something like, let's say, try. And we are gonna do a catch here. Most of the time, or one of the first mistake that I'd like to talk about is when we catch here a generic exception. And what did I do? Yeah. And then it should close, yeah. So we've got an exception here, and basically if you just want to say, for whatever reason, whatever happens, we just want to say an error has happened, we can use this exception. So like we're by no means we are going to be any precise with what actually has happened, which is bad practice basically. But I've seen this happening. Now there are few things that we could do from here. I've seen people doing just rethrowing this exception, or in fact, we don't even need to have this try catch. We can just directly say this, and then whoever is calling the get user should take care of that exception. Now, part of the problem is that also, when we started this stream, we said we are mapping whatever comes from the backend as response, like this one here, which returns user response. We are mapping that to domain model. The same should happen for the exceptions or for the errors. Now, exception is very generic, right? And then first we could model exceptions of our domain, but also the fact that if we throw that exception upwards, it is also becoming a problem. So here, if I decide to use that get user, so what I would do usually, or what I see usually in code bases, is something like view model scope launch, because we need to call a suspending function. Here we are gonna switch the context. I'm not gonna get into that, but we are gonna get something like user is use case repo, get user whatever. Now, because we are throwing that exception upwards, let alone that Kotlin is allowing us to just not handle it, it's just gonna blow. Here we would, maybe we're gonna end up with something like try and catch. Now, this is something that I'm seeing even in these days, in these new code bases. And one thing that I see problematic here is that why would my UI layer or presentation layer deal with such a low level of primitives, which the exceptions are, even though this is super generic exception. I mean, we could have done probably a better if we want to be more granular, let's say now, if we want to deal with different kinds of exceptions. Here, maybe we could have something like, let's say, HTTP exception. Or we can have, let's say, IO exception. And then the thing is, again, regardless if we are throwing this IO exception or HTTP exception, again, like these are very low level abstractions, very low level details. Why would I care about HTTP or IO specifically if I have to deal with them here in my UI or presentation? So that's one mistake that I'm seeing, and we can definitely do better. We can, like, let's say one step better would be introducing, if you really want to use exceptions for dealing with this conditional flow here, it would be much better if you just introduce your own backend exception, which is gonna be, let's say, throwable, and let's say offline exception, also throwable. And then here you are gonna say for HTTP exception, I'm gonna throw backend exception, and here I'm gonna throw offline exception, meaning that here I would still have a try catch, but here I'm gonna be catching something that belongs to my domain, because these are also considered a domain types. So they're not something that, let's say, IO is such a low level thingy, why would I care about? But even if I have my own domain types, even then, I don't think, especially with Kotlin, it is necessary to use exceptions. I think it's more sort of Java way to deal with things, because in Kotlin we have much better constructions, and we are gonna look into those in details as we go. So instead of dealing with exceptions, we could we could construct this much better. We can model this much better. Let's see. So if we want, like, let me actually get rid of this. And yeah, here we'll see later as the compiler will tell us what to do. But basically, there is this type that comes from Kotlin, which is the result type. And the result type is also not the best way to deal with things, and I'm gonna explain why. But let's actually take a look how this would change if I introduce the result. So here I would have this result, which is coming from Kotlin. Notice this type, result, and then that's a generic. So now what I could do is I could return result of a user of that specific type. And here, when I get the user, instead of directly returning the user, I have to say result success, and then I can pass the user that was loaded. So I can return it. In case of an exception, I can return result failure and then wrap this HTTP exception, and I can do the same for my IO exception. And I can lift the return on top. Now that's slightly better, although the API, there is API in Kotlin that can, like, we can make this even better by just saying return run catching, and then what's the block that we want to execute here, and the block is this. And then we can eliminate all of this. Basically, all of this that's selected is equivalent with basically one liner that we can do here. The problem with this is still here I have to deal with exceptions. So I can say user equals get user, and that returns a result. So this is not a user, it's user result. And then here I have to again say user result, for example, get or else, get or throw, and in the else it gives me the throwable. And then I have to deal with this throwable again. So the concept what I'm trying to explain here is that throwable is such a low level detail, such a low level primitive that I don't want to actually have in my presentation layer. My presentation layer doesn't need to know about all those constructs at all. And we can even improve this even further. So let's see what would be the next way of doing this. The next, well, these are pretty much well-known things. I just want to get over them and then compare them and then talk through, because I'm constantly repeatedly seeing this in code bases, why, and I'm trying to explain why these things are not the best and how we can do that better. So as I said, because we are modeling, we are having domain types for the actual data, we can have domain types for the errors as well. And in that sense, here we can introduce our own result, which is going to be sealed type, that's going to have success and error, similar to what we have with this result. So here it would be something like sealed class result that will take a type. And then, bear with me, here I'm going to have, let's say, a data class success that will take data that will be t-type, and it will derive from that result. And this success should also be generic. So here I'm calling the t. And for the error case, again, one thing that I'm seeing repeatedly that is not probably, I mean, there are a few mistakes. Let's take a look. It would be, again, a data class error that will have, now depends what we are going to take here, and those are basically the mistakes, but it will be a result of nothing, and now I can use it. The mistake that I'm seeing is that here, again, people are pulling throwables, are pulling messages. Why it is a mistake? It is a mistake because, again, you are going to have to look, or maybe you're not going to look into that, but if you're not looking, why then you are actually taking it? This data will be used here if I make a call. But the throwable, like, I'm trying to avoid that. That's one. Second is, if I've seen also some people say, for example, let's actually put both of them together. It could be throwable, and it could be, let's say, error message string. Now, the thing is that this error message, when I make a call here, if I use that result, let's actually get rid of the import so that it's going to be easier for us. Well, I don't have to, because this result is this one. Now, instead of run catching, it will be return try, result success, API, load user to user. And then I'm gonna catch, let's say, HTTP exception, this one. And then I will say result error HTTP exception, and then here would be some message. Now, this is not compiling because of the covariance. I have to use a covariant here, and that's going to be probably material for another stream. But the thing is, with this data class, that I'm still pulling the throwable and the error message. The HTTP, the actual exception, the throwable, dealing with that in my presentation, we already explained. But then what about this error message? So if the error message is something that I would say, for example, I don't know, backend error, then what if I want to have this error in French or in Spanish or in Greek? I don't know. You see, it is not scalable. So if this error comes from the actual backend, and if you are having server-driven UI, and if the backend knows about what language you are using, and if the backend can give you the result in that language, perfect. But if that's not the case, you are better off to just model the errors in a different way so that the UI will decide what sort of state or how to represent that error particularly. And in that sense, instead of result.error here, what we could have, we could create this as a sealed class error. And then this error is going to be result nothing, but inside we could have as many, again, sealed types if we need to, as we want. So this error can have, let's say, a sealed class. Again, depending on how granular we want to be with the errors, let's imagine that we have a backend that would return, I don't know, we want to handle 401, 403, and then generic, whatever else, 40 whatever, or 500. Now, in that case, here we would have sealed class, let's say, backend error, which is going to derive from the error. And then we can have data object that's going to be, let's say, offline error. And in here, then I'm going to have data object, let's say, unauthorized, which is going to be a backend error. That's going to be for 401. Then I can have, I don't know, not found, let's say, for the sake of having it, and then one more generic, or I can say unavailable, for example. And now these are actual domain types I can use to decide in my UI side what I am dealing with? What do I have to represent? Like how am I? This is sort of the modeling that I want in my UI, that the UI will decide based on this. Okay, what error am I going to show? And since this is a domain type, I could maybe create reusable UI that will just take an error and then based on its type create some sort of valuable thing, and or related UI that will represent that error, and I can reuse that over time. And then if I need to support one more or remove one more, it's going to be a matter of changing basically less places. Okay. So then in that case here, what I would have in case of HTTP exception, I can check what sort of exception is the HTTP. When exception code, let's say, is 401, I can say result error backend unauthorized. When it's 404, was it not found? I don't remember. Else could be unavailable. And then I can say catch IO, which then would be result error, but instead of backend now, it's going to be offline. So bear with me. This is like unused. I don't need to have a name for it. So this is much better. This is much better. Now, before you start generalizing like this, I would suggest actually have dedicated types per call, at least 3. So once you have 3 calls or more, then generalize. So what I'm trying to say is, like, first try to have sealed class, let's say user result, that doesn't result, that's not going to have any any generics, nothing, just data class success val user, which is user result, and then data class, it could be this error, like depending again on the granularity, how much granular you want to be. But like, go through that pain and see, well, it's not a pain, go through that process and understand, is this cleaner, or do you really need to generalize it to have a common type? If this feels cleaner, if this is something that your teammates can understand better, then stick to what's easier to work with. So don't try to, apply everything that you're gonna see in podcasts like this or articles or whatever. Just stick to simplicity, guys. Really, it's much easier or much more appreciated when somebody comes to the code base and they see something they can easily understand and easily work with and adopt. But if it's full of conspiracy or some stuff hard to understand, hard to work with, it's less appreciated. Let's say it that way. So here you can have object backend error, which is gonna be user result, and then let's say offline. So if these 3 are enough to represent in your UI all the cases, let's say you have success, you have backend error, you have offline. So if that's enough in your UI to inform the user well enough what happens, what's going on wrong, just stick to this. You don't need to prematurely generalize or optimize. So that's very important. Now, once you see that you have that duplication and you have a problem with that duplication and you want to have something generic, then you can generalize it like this. And then what you can do is, because probably over time, again, get through that duplication, see that it is actually a problem. Until then, do that. But when you actually see that it is a problem, that you want to have it more generalized, then you can also take this because this is probably something that you're going to duplicate a few times. You can generalize it into a function as well. And for the sake of this stream, I'm going to write that function, how we can use a common function, and then again have here as little code as possible, just the same as we had with the Kotlin results that run catching. So what we could do is we can have a suspending function that's gonna also take a generic, and we can call this create network call. Then the actual call will be a slot that will reproduce that result t, and we are going to return a result, but our own result again of t. Now, because this block, usually we are making a call to a suspending function, as you can see, this block also here has to be suspending. And now here we can basically take this, paste it. So I'm gonna return try. Here I would do the block, catch HTTP, catch IO, and then I'm returning that. And now I can leverage this function here. I can say return create network call API load user for user ID and then map it to user. Boom. Again, one liner. But again, this is cool. This is nice. I'm seeing similar things in code bases, but I would say first, like, actually get through that repetition, see what you need to have, and see what is obsolete. Because if you just start applying things that you saw somewhere, maybe you're not gonna need all of them. That's what I'm trying to say and to explain. Okay, now that's cool. So far, so good. What if, for example, this is a suspending function and returns result? I'm seeing similar things with flows. What if we had a flow? So for example, if I had a function load user, let's say, and then this one, again, user ID string, we're gonna have a flow of user, let's say. Yeah. So one way would be to have here, for example, make this equals flow, and here we are going to emit. Yeah, I need to import these things. Emit, let's say API load user for user ID and then to user. So this is pretty legit. The thing is, if I just do this, and possible exception has to be again handled. And where we are going to handle, so again, the same applies if I'm going to be handling here. So let's first actually see how we can use this user result. The user result is gonna be get user, and then here I can just do when user result is success. Then I can do something with the user result data, which is gonna be my user. Otherwise is result error. I can do something with the error. As I said, I can actually even have another mapping that will, let's say, generate some sort of error that I can have reusable, composable, or reusable UI that will render that particular error. And again, I would mention that granularity, how granular we want to be. But what if in case of the flows? So we could have, let's say, some state is going to be a mutable state of, come on, mutable state flow user initially null, right? Then I can have state, which is going to be the state on start. I'm going to, let's say, load the user. then what I'm seeing usually is like catching or catch, and then dealing with the exception to update the state from it, and then state in view model scope. Let's say well the default is gonna be null, and then this will be sharing started while subscribed 5,000. So you would see something like that. Again, this is not, I mean, the same applies. Having like dealing with exceptions in your UI. It's like too low level. Regardless if you are gonna have the rest of the things done this way, could be differently how you're gonna collect your flow, and how you're gonna initiate the call. But this one here, even though it is there, it is in the API, dealing with such things, it's like, putting the things in the wrong place. They are still fruits, but you putting bananas in the basket of apples, or in the basket of, I don't know, kiwi, it just doesn't fit. It should go in that. That's how I am imagining the things. So like, deal with the things where the place for that is. So what we could do better is we could also put this one, we can wrap it into result user, or we could catch that exception here. But yeah, to catch that exception here, we need to do here result user, and then do the try catch. Or if the API, if the load user is returning a flow, then we can basically map the flow here. So if, I don't know, let's say I had a function here, if this was a flow, then here I could have do something like API, this one, fetch user ID, and then I could do map to user, and then catch exception, and then map that exception into whatever result I am going to have, similar to what we've done here in the create network call with this. All right. So that would be it. That's the material that I wanted to share for today. So again, there are different ways, there are different approaches. Just the two things that I'm paying attention to is, if you need to model something for the UI in terms of string or something, just don't do it. Use your own types and then decide in the UI based on that type, like an available, not found, unauthorized, or whatever, which message is going to be delivered to the UI to the user, depending on the granularity that you need. That's one. And the second one is, don't deal with low-level abstractions into higher level, like with low-level abstraction data in a higher level of abstraction instances. So like, if you think of layering, something that belongs in a lower level, don't throw it up the layers. So deal it in the layer where you have to, and give up sort of type that belongs to that layer more, or it is more sort of suitable for that layer. Those are the general things that I wanted to share, and there will be much deeper session about these things, about layers of abstraction and how to deal with them properly, where to put what, and that would be in one of the next ones, but I couldn't promise when and where. That being said, it's going to be a very insightful session, I think, and it's all about splitting data and functionality. All right. with that, I would like to say thanks for everybody attending. Now, if there are any questions, I would like to proceed with questions for the people in the call, and people on YouTube. You can also drop the questions in the chat. Yeah, go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe, for this session.
Welcome.
It's really enlightening, right? So the question I have would be, so you're using sealed class to model the error, at least to model the result generally. That's your domain type as sealed class. Is there a possibility to also use sealed interface? Because I've seen people use sealed interface as well. But I'm wondering, is there an advantage to using one over the other?
I think in this case, for modeling this kind of error, it's gonna be the same. I mean, when you're using interface, you can have your subtypes like outside of the interface, and also with interfaces, you can also have abstract values. Well, you can do that with a sealed class too. So in this case, I don't think there will be any difference.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. Okay. So since I don't see any other questions, I'm gonna consider um, the session to be done. Thanks everybody for attending and for the questions. And hopefully this one at least had some value, um, some cleaned up some misconceptions, and hopefully it's gonna make us better in terms of separating the concerns better. And more on that, as I said, there will be in a new session. I don't know when, but I am working on that to prepare. And yeah, you can find link to the repository in the description below. And also, if you for those that are interested in getting more enlightenment or things like that in one-on-one setup or hands-on support, or those that are working on projects, personal projects, you can also find link in the description to join our community where we are actually doing that actively. Cool. Thank you, everybody, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.